Hey guys, it's M4J here and welcome back to the Jeffries network on OpenTTD, and welcome to possibly the biggest construction project so far in this entire series. We are building a huge main line. We are extending the northeast main line, which technically should now be called the northern main line because it doesn't really go northeast from this point onwards. It tends to just go to the north. Huge construction project, loads of embankments, loads of digging cuttings, a nice big bridge which you'll see in a second as well. Plus I go back and re-signal the entire route between GSG and the current end of this line, just to make sure that the trains are actually going to use the line properly. As for trains, whilst I'm on that subject, all of the trains at the moment, to quote Thomas the Tank Engine, all of the trains are currently tucked up away in bed. There are no trains operating on the network at this moment in time. Reason being, the scheduling was just so off. Everything was sort of out of the way. I did ask, I think it was last episode, why that was, and one person responded saying, had I been holding control when I do autofill? Yes, I always hold control when I do autofill. I'm sure I've mentioned that in the past as well, but I've always said there's no such thing as a bad suggestion. Maybe not a patronising suggestion, but no such thing as a bad suggestion. So I appreciate the suggestion. It wasn't that, unfortunately. There is something, perhaps there's a bug in the patch or something like that, which is causing the scheduling to mess up. The real reason that became a huge problem was the freight trains operating on the overground loop. I ended up with a huge queue on the Great Western Main Line right the way back to Woolworth. Trains trying to get into the overground loop from GSP. That shouldn't happen. Doesn't matter how many trains we have running the loop, that should not happen. The overground trains were being held up, freight trains were being held up, the whole thing was an absolute mess. So every single train on the entire network, including the Metro and the HLR, and even trains that were on separate networks that weren't actually holding up anything else, they've all been put away, and we're going to next episode start again essentially, and try and get it working properly. Fingers crossed on that one. I have a feeling it'll take a long time to actually fix this problem, which is kind of one of the reasons why I pulled the trains away and thought we'd do some building first, because I always had this little bit here in mind. So we're actually going to go and get it done. Now the episode plan says we're going to build the northeast main line as far as Hudwood. We kind of do that. We got a little bit beyond there, but not too far. We build all branches on the existing northeast main line, and then we create services on all northeast main line lines, essentially. We don't do the last one. I'll tell you that now. We don't do the last one because, as I said, all the trains are put away. If they hadn't have been put away, we would do the services. I'm still going to run you through the services and tell you sort of written on a napkin type design for how the services are going to be run. Very similar to the East Coast main line. And I know I keep saying and I'm going to try and stop doing that because that's very annoying. It annoys me as much as it annoys you guys, I can assure you. So let's talk about branching main lines, shall we? Let's talk about the one that I know of. I know there's loads, don't get me wrong. You know, the Great Western Main Line has 3 branches just within sort of Berkshire area. The Windsor branch, the Henley-on-Thames branch, I want to say, or I think it's the Marlow branch, and there is a third one, Greenford, I think it is, Greenford branch. So I know of those ones. The West Coast Main Line there's loads and loads of branches on the West Coast Main Line. The reason I'm not really bringing those up is they tend to all be main line services still. So for example, you can get a train from Euston to, let's say, Manchester, either via Birmingham or via the Trent Valley. They do join up again, like they separate, they join up again. And I think the Trent Valley is now 4-track for the majority of its length, but it used to be just 2-track. And it's kind of those 2-track branch lines that I want to talk about. So I live on the East Coast Main Line, I say that quite a lot. So you should know that. I've just said again, I do apologise. Where I live, we're on the main line, the main East Coast Main Line, 4-track main line, runs all the way up into Nottinghamshire. I think it's at Newark where it becomes 2. Oh no, actually no. Huntingdon, I think, is where it goes from 4 tracks to 2. The thing with the East Coast is it does go, it stays at 4 track for quite a long time, and then it goes to 2, and then every now and then it goes back up to 4 and back to 2, back to 4, back to 2. And there is a short section, I think it is between Huntingdon and Peterborough actually, where it's 3 track for some reason. There are plans to add the 4th track back in. That always confuses me though. If you're going to take a track out, take out 2, not just the 1. Because even if you have the 3 tracks, I think the 3rd track was left for freight trains, but you can only ever have 1 train using that line at any one time unless they're all running in the same direction, which is a rarity at best. So it seems a bit pointless to have 3 tracks, but that's what the situation is. So the East Coast main line at the southern end, so between Hitchin and King's Cross, there are some branches. There are 3. To be precise. From Hitchin there is a branch line that goes off towards Cambridge, and I can't remember the exact name of it off the top of my head. It's something like the Cambridge Link Line, something like that. Let's look it up. Here's a good test, because I've said that I don't remember what it's called, but I'm now looking it up and I'm going to say what it is. It's just called the Cambridge Line. There we go. Cambridge Junction on the East Coast main line to Shepperth, which is part of the Great Northern Route. But I'd be interested to see if anyone's actually commented with the answer. I always like to do these little tests to make sure people are paying attention, and there have been some cases in recent memory where people have failed the test, which makes them look a little bit silly if you ask me, but there you go. Right, is it the Cambridge line? Yeah. So it runs from Cambridge Junction on the East Coast main line, which is just north of Hitchin, to Shepperth Branch Junction on the West Anglia main line, just south of Cambridge. It's used by Great Northern. It's how trains run between King's Lynn and King's Cross, and Cambridge and King's Cross, Ely, King's Cross, you get the idea. In the very near future, I believe it's from the end of next year, you will also be able to get trains from Cambridge to Brighton via the Thameslink route. Actually, let me just take a small interjection here, because I want to talk to you about this huge viaduct that I've just built on screen. I said all along that I wanted a big bridge, and this is the big bridge. This is my Digswell Viaduct. You can see originally I built it as 4 track, and I thought that's not very realistic. So we have this really nice double track viaduct that runs right across that valley there. As I say, it's my Digswell. If you don't know what a Digswell Viaduct is, it's one of the bottlenecks on the southern end of the East Coast main line. It's actually the only section south of Huntingdon that's 2 track. There's a small section, Digswell Viaduct, which is just north of Welwyn Garden City, runs over the river Mimram, which I've never liked that name. It's an old name, very old name. I believe the Mimram Valley was formed by a glacier, in fact, that's how old the river is. But it runs across there, and then you go through Welwyn North Station, and then there's 2 tunnels, Welwyn South and Welwyn North tunnels, and then it goes back to 4 track just before Nebworth, which is a bottleneck, and there are plans again, not concrete plans, but there have been discussions about doubling the number of tracks there as well, creating 4 tracks. But it hasn't happened yet, so that is still a bottleneck. So I thought I'd do a loving tribute, because the Digswell Viaduct is a fantastic looking structure. It's one of these ones, it's kind of like an unsung hero almost. Everyone talks about famous bridges. You've got the Firth of Forth, you've got, you know, Clifton Suspension Bridge, you've got the Ribblehead Viaduct. Let me think of some others. You've got the High Level Bridge, the King George V Bridge. No one ever talks about Digswell Viaduct anymore, and I think that's really sad, because it's just as spectacular, if not more so. In fact, if you watch Top Gear, there's the episode where they race Tornado between King's Cross and Edinburgh against the car and the bike. There's a really, really nice shot there of Tornado going over Digswell Viaduct, but they never say what it is. I just think that's really sad. It feels like some of our local history being lost almost, or claim to fame, shall we say, being lost. Anyway, what was I talking about? Loop lines. Yes. So you have the Cambridge line, which runs between Hitchin and Cambridge. I was talking about Thameslink, wasn't I? Yeah, from next year you can go from Thameslink, on Thameslink between Cambridge and Brighton, and other destinations. I assume they'll be running the Sutton Loop as well on those services. I'm not 100% sure. Other loop lines, the Hertford Loop. Now the Hertford Loop is a bit, again, it's a bit of an unsung hero actually, because the Hertford Loop at the moment is part of an experiment, well not experiment, a trial that's going on that will affect all mainline railways in Britain in the future. So the Hertford Loop runs between Alexandra Palace and Stevenage, just south of Stevenage. If you ever wonder, if you look at Bounds Green Depot, there's that track that goes, if you're looking north, it goes off to the left, curves over the top of the East Coast Main Line and disappears behind the depot. That is the northern, the down line of the Hertford Loop. The up line sort of snakes around. The up line is actually very cleverly disguised, because I used to always think it was a siding in the depot, but it's not, it's a main line. The Hertford Loop is used from time to time if the East Coast Main Line is shut at night. East Coast trains, Virgin East Coast trains, will use the Hertford Loop as a diversionary route. I think it's sort of used for freight every now and then, although there isn't that much demand for it. The main reason it's used is Moorgate services. Moorgate services terminate at two different places, Welwyn Garden City and Stevenage. The ones that terminate at Stevenage, more often than not, go via the Hertford Loop. And I'm just going to get a list of stations. Perfect. So between Alexandra Palace and Stevenage are the following stations running from south to north: Bowes Park, Palmer's Green, Winchmore Hill, Grange Park, Enfield Chase, Gordon Hill, Cruise Hill, Cuffley, Bayford, Hertford North, which is the main station on the loop, hence the name, Watton at Stone, and then Stevenage. Now there are other lines that used to link up with that particular line, but they don't exist anymore, unfortunately. I did name them all, didn't I? Yeah. Yes, good. So the Hertford Loop line, it's one of these ones where it is a main line. Essentially, it's part of the East Coast Main Line. If you ever look at the East Coast Main Line, it will be mentioned. But the maximum speed on it is 75 miles per hour, which is not an express line or a main line speed. And the only trains really that use it are the Class 313s that run to Moorgate. It's operated by Great Northern. As I said, it sometimes uses the diversionary route. The reason it's so important at the moment is because it's currently being used to trial the new signalling systems. The ERTMS, I want to say. Yeah, ERTMS, which is the European Railway Traffic Management System, Level 2, or Grade 2. I can't remember which one it is now. I think it's Grade 2. We'll find out. Does it actually mention it on its Wikipedia page? Yeah, European Rail Traffic Management System. It's a real mouthful. So there is a small section of the track. It's a 5.5 mile section of the double track that's been re-signalled to be bi-directional, with the other track also being re-signalled to be bi-directional. It's the down line, so it's the line running away from King's Cross, and they're using that as a test bed to try out this new signalling system to see if it will be feasible in the UK. They've also converted a 313 unit to use the signalling system, and it sounds like it's been very successful, because when the Azumas start running on the East Coast in 2018 or 2019, I think it's 2019 now, I think there's a bit of a delay, but they're going to be using this new signalling system, so they've been trialling it on the East Coast specifically for that reason. Currently, the 800s, the 801s, the 802s that are going to be operating on Great Western Railways, I don't think have been fitted at this moment in time with this new signalling system, because the Great Western Main Line hasn't got it in place. I think it's going to be added as part of the electrification program. But the East Coast will have it, because the East Coast is one of these main lines that was actually designed specifically for high-speed running, but mostly for high-speed running at the time, so 60-70 miles an hour. Over time, there have been additions which have made it capable of 125 miles per hour running. In fact, there is one particular section of the East Coast Main Line called the something diversion, and again, I'm just going to get it up on my screen, because where is it? This is going to bug me as well, because it's a really, really important piece of track that was built a little while ago now. The reason it's important is because it was the first part of the line or the first main line ever in the UK to be designed specifically for 125 miles per hour running. And I'm going to find the name of this line. Selby Diversion, that's the one. It was opened in 1983, and it was designed to avoid a bit of a bottleneck. The original line through Selby, there was a swing bridge which caused problems if there was a boat and a train coming at the same time, and I think it was something to do with, it was 2-track only, and there was a sharp bend or something that was let me find out again. I should do my research beforehand, but actually I kind of like doing it in the episodes as well. It gives it a bit more realism. The reason it was built anyway was to speed up journey times through that particular area. So you no longer have to go over the swing bridge, you no longer have to go around all the bits that were slowing down trains. It was the first purpose-built section of high-speed railway in the UK, having a design speed of 125 miles per hour. The reason that's so important is because it's quite easy to upgrade a line that's been designed for high-speed running to allow it to have a little bit more high-speed running. So in this case, 15 miles an hour extra from 125 to 140. That's going to be incredibly important when the Azumas come to play, because at the moment it doesn't matter too much because there are no trains in the UK that have a service speed of more than 125 miles per hour, bar the Javelins, but they're never going to run on the East Coast. So it's quite handy that we also already have the experience of building the high-speed routes. It also means that the East Coast is ready to be upgraded, something that we can't actually get on the West Coast. 110 miles an hour is the fastest speed you can go on the duration of the West Coast without having tilting technology in your train. That's why all the London Midland trains, the Class 350s, they all got a maximum service speed of 110 miles per hour, because that is legally the fastest and safely the fastest speed they can actually go across the West Coast main line. Obviously the Pendolinos have tilting technology, but even then they're still limited to 125. There was a campaign a little while ago. Virgin tried to have the speed increased to 135, and I think at one point 140 was also mooted. But the Office of Road and Rail Regulation, I think it was, who was in charge of it, turned them down and said you can't do it. Because, I mean, realistically speaking, the West Coast Main Line is probably one of the best designed but one of the worst designed railways in the UK, because it was designed very well to fit in with all the terrain around it. It has to snake through several valleys, the Trent Valley, it has to go up through some of the Lake District and up into Cumbria and places like that. But it did come at a cost, and the cost is the maximum speed. So the East Coast Main Line is technically the fastest route between London and Scotland if you get on one of the Class 91s. Or the Intercity 225 as they're officially known. I think the stopping patterns of the two lines, it is actually possible to get a Pendolino to Glasgow in the same time it takes you to get a train from King's Cross to Edinburgh. But that's because of the stopping patterns. There is one train a day, I think it is, from Euston that only stops at, I want to say, Preston. And that's it. It runs straight up to Glasgow. So at the moment it doesn't matter too much because Virgin are running both routes, but when it was, let's say, GNER versus Virgin, it was kind of like during the old days, LNER and LMS, there was a real speed race going on. Who's the fastest? I watched a documentary a little while ago about that, and in fact there was a speed run with one of the Coronation class locos where they tried to set the steam record. This was just before Mallard set her record. So the record was 112 miles per hour by the Silver Jubilee. The Coronation reached 114 miles per hour. The reason it's so significant, first of all, they broke the record. I mean, that's pretty damn significant if you ask me. But safety wise, it was a very stupid thing for them to try and do, because they entered Crewe, which at the time had a 25 mile per hour speed restriction and a very sharp bend through the platform. They entered Crewe at 50 to 60 miles per hour, almost twice, in fact more than twice, the safe speed, and the train very nearly derailed, which at that speed would have cost lives. It was a very foolish thing to do. Thankfully they got away with it, and they did break the record. But it could have gone very, very badly. Then, of course, Mallard came through and smashed the record anyway. You know, 112 to 114, those 2 miles per hour is a huge deal. The faster you go, the harder it is to go that little bit faster, if that makes sense. Because at very high speeds, this is some of my brief physics knowledge coming out again. At very high speeds, air becomes more like water in terms of its density. That's why high-speed trains are streamlined. It's not just because they look nice, it's also because it's practical and it's functional. It actually makes it easier to gain speed. So for Mallard to not just beat the record, but to beat it by 12 miles per hour, that was a huge thing, and that's why it hasn't been beaten. Feasibly, it is possible for Mallard's record to be broken. I think the reason no one's actually tried it is because they want the record to stay as it is. It's kind of like a sentimental thing. Mallard's got that record and they worked really hard to get it. It would almost feel like theft if someone was to come out and beat it. Even though I think it is perfectly possible. If you get modern technology in building a steam locomotive, you will beat that record. Simple as. But I like the record as it is. You know, Mallard has pride of place in the National Railway Museum. I don't particularly want it to be beaten either. But anyway, that's by the by. So, the East Coast Main Line. I've always had a bias towards the Great Western in my lifetime. I've always been, as you know, a huge fan of Brunel. I always think the Great Western Railway was better designed, better built. Even the trains looked nicer. They were more functional. The journey times were really quick. Unsung heroes again. The unofficial Flying Scotsman was officially the first steam locomotive to go 100 miles per hour, but unofficially there is talk that City of Truro did it before. It was never confirmed. Everyone seems to accept that it did, but it's never been officially confirmed because there was no measuring equipment on board when it happened. So you kind of have to take their word for it. And you know, back then, unfortunately, it was quite easy to lie. Although I don't know why you would just come out one day and say that your trainer broke the record. You would normally have some reason to say that. So I believe it did. The fact is, I'm sure they ran City of Truro again afterwards and it beat the record. So, it didn't beat the record, sorry, it crossed 100 miles per hour. And then very recently, I think it was Bitten, the A4. Not fond of that name either, by the way, Bitten. Bit weird. I think that's one of the ones that's named after a bird. Let me check that. But that ran at, I don't know, yeah, Bitten ran at 99 miles per hour recently on a rail tour to and from York to celebrate the 70th or 80th anniversaries of the A4. Must be the 80th. Must be the 90th actually. How old are the A4s? I don't even know. Yeah, Bitten is a classification of birds in the heron family. Well, that makes sense. Let me find out just how old the A4s are a second. Class A4. 1935, so it was 2 years ago they celebrated their 80th anniversary and Bitten ran at 99 miles per hour, I believe it was. This year, I'm just checking this again, it might be 90 miles an hour actually. This year Tornado reached 100, so it is still perfectly possible for a steam engine to run at high speed, and it survived. That's the main thing. Bear in mind, Tornado, yes, it's had some modern technology thrown into it, but it is essentially following the original plans of Peppercorn, and it managed to reach 100 miles an hour and was comfortable. They had some measuring equipment on board, and it never really ran into the red, which is really encouraging when you think about it. Where was I going with this? Do you know what? I can't even remember where I was going with this now. High speed running. I think that was what I was getting at. But my allegiances are starting to wane slightly. I'm always going to be a fan of the GWR. Even the modern day GWR. There's just something about it. The seawall along Dawlish. It will never be beaten. You'll never have a railway like that. You will in other countries maybe, but even then a lot of them were inspired by the original Great Western formation. But my allegiances are starting to lean slightly towards LNER. If you look at the history of LNER, you've got the A1s, the A2s, the A3s, the A4s. You've got the B1s, you've got the B17s, you've got the J's, the K's. You know, they're all really functional, good-looking locomotives. And then you have engines like Flying Scotsman and Mallard, and I mean all of the A4s. Even the names of the A4s. You've got ones like Dwight D. Eisenhower, you've got Sir Nigel Gresley, you've got Union of South Africa. They're really well-named locomotives. And then you've got the A1s like Tornado. Tornado is a very good example of you can still build steam engines in the 21st century. It's, you know, it's constantly proving that there is still something about steam that's so magical and so amazing. And I think it was the A1 Trust who built Tornado. They're now working on a P2. There's loads of new build locomotives happening right now as well. The steam industry is far from dead. Something worth remembering, Evening Star, which is a 9F, was the last steam locomotive to be built at the time in the UK. It was the last steam locomotive to be built by British Railways. That's the only claim to fame it still has, is it was the last steam locomotive built by BR. In actual fact, it's not even close to being the last steam locomotive built in Britain. There are narrow gauge locos still being built in Britain for different railways, not just in Britain but around the world. Then you've got engines like Tornado, you've got the P2. There is one called the Unknown Warrior, I believe. Let me just check that that's not the P2. That might be the P2. Oh no, it's not. So it's Patriot. The LMS Patriot project is to build a steam locomotive called the Unknown Warrior. I think there's one being built at the moment called Manchester United as well. Is that the P2? That's a B17. So yeah, there's going to be a steam locomotive, a B17 built called Manchester United. Now, as a football fan, I despise that name. But there were steam locomotives back in the day that were named after football teams, and Manchester United was one of those that was scrapped. New build steam locos UK. Let's have a look at that, because there's a Great Western project going on at the moment as well. I think there's two actually Great Western projects, and then there's the P2 as well. So there is plenty going on. Something that I read a long time ago now, many years ago, it's about 10 years ago, in my railway magazine. I think it was part of Railfest. They did kind of like a what if scenario, and they took the liveries of the train operating companies at that time that were operating on the main lines and applied those liveries to steam locomotives that used to operate on those lines. So for example, there was a GNER livery on an A4. There was a Virgin livery on Coronation, and there's something about that. I kind of want them to do it in real life, because they were also campaigning for modern built steam locomotives. They said with the right technology you can build a steam locomotive that can go faster than the HST, and then the liveries was like a mock-up as to what it would look like. But I mean, you see things like the King Edward III, I think it was. When they finished refurbishing or renovating that locomotive, they painted it blue, and Tornado for a while was painted blue as well. But the Blue King was the real sort of headline star of the show for a long time. And I kind of feel like they need to do something like that with one loco from each original operating company. So get an A4 that is still existing but maybe not a headlining loco, and paint it in Virgin Trains East Coast livery, just to see what it would look like, even for a short time. Even if they don't actually paint it, but they vinyl wrap it as a publicity thing, and just see what it looks like. The real one I want to see is a King class with the new GWR livery. That would look really cool. Again, unfortunately with the main lines, it is Virgin or Virgin, so you'll end up with two locos with a very similar looking livery. But the rest of the main lines, you get some real sort of variety going on there, just to see what it would look like, you know. Let me think, what did the Midland Railway used to have? 4F maybe, or a 7F. Or even sort of bend the rules a little bit and have like a 9F with East Midlands Trains livery, something like that. You know, maybe someone start a campaign for that and see if anyone bites. Should we go back to talking about my network for a second, because I want to talk to you very quickly before this episode ends, which is in quite a long time actually still. You can see I'm doing some re-signaling on the screen at the moment, but I want to talk about the services. So you saw I built, I think it was 3 branch lines off the existing main line. Some were just connected to the slow lines, some were connected to the slow lines and the fast lines. Now the plan is to have lots of different services start at GSG, go through the majority of the main stations, either all stopping or semi-fast or express, and if we end up with some trains taking the branch, they're all going to be made up of the EMUs, but some of them are going to be running like semi-fast services. So let's say between GSG and Brafingfield, which is the airport, run non-stop to there, and then maybe you'll stop to Honningville and then run fast again to the last big station before the junction, and then have it run all stopper off the junction and down the branch line. That's kind of the plan. I'm not going to run 225s down all of the branches, although there is one where I am tempted to have some 225s run down there, because there is quite a long way between GSG and that particular branch. And you can see here I'm fiddling around with the signals, making it so that freight trains are all accepted on the slow lines only. At this moment in time I don't have any plans on running freight trains on the fast lines. Once the cargo EMUs start being rolled out on the network, I'll set them up with the orders that they don't even need to be allowed through the signal because they're freight trains. They'll just be allowed through because their next stop is part of the criteria to be let through that particular signal. Now some of the stations, this one in particular we're looking at right now, I'm not 100% happy with its placement. I feel like it's kind of segregated the town a little bit, intercepted the route that would have gone into the town road wise, but at the same time I feel like a big station like that is kind of the opposite of what Nottingham Victoria was. Nottingham Victoria was the sort of the flagship station of the GCR's Great Central Railway's London extension, and it was built in a deep cutting sort of right in the centre of Nottingham, where the Victoria shopping centre is now, if anyone is interested. One of those things I'm really angry reading about it, that I always knew that the Great Central Railway was shut because of route duplication. They saw it as it copied the same route as the Midland Main Line and the West Coast Main Line. But what really angers me about it is they knew they couldn't just shut it. They couldn't justify just closing the route. So they deliberately sabotaged it. They ran less services. They sent all of the old worn out locos and carriage stock to that route and just ran it into the ground, to the point where people still protested about it being closed, but they felt like they had more justification for just shutting it and getting rid of it. And I think that's such a horrible way to close down what was at the time, and still really is, an iconic route. Nothing's bested it. It was designed for European traffic, and you know, the guy who built it wanted to run trains to the continent via a channel tunnel, and 35 years after that route was shut and mothballed, it became a reality. The channel tunnel opened 1960. When was it? 1967, I think it finally closed completely. And there were some really nice stations on that route. Nottingham Victoria was one of them. It was one of the biggest stations in the country when it opened. It was a joint station, so it wasn't just the Great Central. There was also the Great Northern, and I think the Midland had running rights there as well. And then for a brief period it became part of the LNER, so some famous steam locos used to go through the centre of Nottingham. And then it became part of the eastern region of British Rail, and that's where it all went wrong. But even stations like Leicester Central, trains can never run there ever again because it's now a car park. But the Great Central Railway, the Heritage Line, is trying to restore the line between... Currently it runs between Loughborough and just north of Leicester. but they're trying to link the Loughborough section back up to a section that runs to Nottingham. And I really hope, I've got the funding for it, but I really hope that it becomes a huge success and actually sort of reignites maybe trying to extend it even more. Because it was such a good railway, and I can't believe that they just didn't have the foresight to try and keep hold of it. That's what makes me really upset and angry about it, is they wanted it to fail and they made it fail. That will not be happening on my network, by the way. The Lafayette branch is the only example of one that I've mothballed, really, and even then, the reason I mothballed it is because I knew that what I was turning it into is a better option, and now the HLR exists and it is a much better option. More passengers can be conveyed, the trains are nicer, the route's quicker, and it's become a key part of the mass transit in and around Guard City. But yeah, we're going to try and make some intensive services, as the title of this video suggests. We're going to have lots and lots of trains running in and out of GSG up this northeast main line, either all stopping or continuous running, or some that stop at every station. There are some more branches that we already had on this line, of course. There was the loop line that runs between Honingville and Donborough. That will be kept. The service will be pretty much the same. All services on that route will run up to Nantburg Springs, which was another branch we had coming off the northwest side of Honingville. They will then run through Honingville onto the branch down to Donborough, and then from Donborough to Plintbridge they'll run on the main line, obviously on the slow lines. And then once they get to Plintbridge, they will go onto the Bartholomew branch, which is the other existing branch that we had. And that will be our little tribute to the Hertford Loop line and the services that run to Moorgate. Besides that, I think we might have another service that runs just from GSG to Nantburg. We might again make that an all-stopper. But we haven't done this on the other lines yet, which is something else that will be happening in the near future. But we're going to start introducing the semi-fast services again. So not every train will stop at every station that runs on the slow lines. Obviously, if you're on the express lines, you won't stop at every station anyway, but I'm talking about the slow lines specifically. So if you get on a train at GSG, you might get on the train at the express platforms. You'll then skip a few stations, you might even skip through Plintbridge. You'll get to somewhere like Donborough, you'll then switch over to the slow line, stop at Donborough, and then you'll run maybe every station to the airport, and then you'll run fast again to Honingville, and then from Honingville, who knows, you'll either be an all-stopper or you'll be a semi-fast. Obviously you will know when you actually go on the train, but at this moment in time, I can't give you exact specifics, but I do know that we will have a variety of stopping, semi-fast, express, and in some cases even super express. Not high speed, but super express. There will be a difference, and I will explain that in the future once we actually get the trains running. All the services that I plan on running on this line will probably be implemented, or at least the first set will be implemented on Wednesday when we do our little network reset, which is incidentally the title of Wednesday's episode. But I will leave the spoilers there, and I will start to leave this episode here as well, guys. It's been a long one. It was a 2-hour time lapse originally, which I've cut down to, what is this, 38 minutes. So hopefully you've enjoyed the music, hopefully you've enjoyed my talking. Besides that, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and of course if you're enjoying the series. Drop some comments down below with ideas for future episodes. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button. If you have already subscribed to the channel, thank you guys for your continued support, and until next time, I will see you soon.